et cetera, out of it.
For the Scott, I mean, for the president, the former president's campaign, such as it is. I mean, not much of a campaign so far, but his announcement. Does this impact it?
Well, he's had a really bad month. I mean, he announced his campaign. It was super flat. The midterms have been widely interpreted by a lot of Republicans as a repudiation of his impact on the party. And a lot of folks that I think used to really support him are rethinking whether we want to go through this again. So this is another reminder.
There was also the neo-Nazi white supremacist
Absolutely.
launch and the tearing up the Constitution.
And just as important, and his saying we have to tear up the Constitution, which I think on January 6th, that's what he also said. I mean, when you're the president, you take an oath. Best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. He failed on January 6th. He's now saying it again. So all of this is just a story for Republicans to consider about whether you want to drag these heavy bags through another campaign only to have the American people tell us for a third time, we don't want it.
I think it's a black guy, but the guy that he picked was the wrong black guy.
So you think it's insulting?
I think it's
absolutely
insulting. It's the judgment around the kinds of people you want to run for office, this addiction to celebrity culture.
Yeah.
Honestly, I mean, look, I mean, this is one of the things about Republicans over the years. You know, we don't have any celebrities much. You know, there's a handful of folks. We have Duncan, and that's about it. But when somebody pops up and they're famous, and all of a sudden it's like, is this person a Republican? And people start to elevate them beyond potentially what they're capable of. Look what's happened with Kanye West. And Herschel Walker, I think, you know, obviously got the nomination because not just because Trump picked him, but, you know, he legitimately a legend, but that doesn't necessarily make you the kind of person people want to put in the Senate. Now, we're still counting votes tonight. We'll see what happens. But one of the things coming out of the midterm for me as a Republican is, I was talking to a Republican about this the other night, and he said, I think people just want normal folks who have good character. And that doesn't mean you have to pick every celebrity out there and elevate them beyond what they're capable of.
But that's a part of the Trump brand.
I don't think a strong base of voters in the metro Atlanta area that just haven't been counted yet.
Here's why it's close. Because for all the talk we've had about Herschel Walker and Donald Trump tonight, what we haven't discussed yet is Joe Biden is not popular. He's not popular in Georgia. There's a reason he's been in Boston and Arizona and everywhere else. His policies aren't popular. People aren't happy with the economy. There are flashing red lights here for Republicans, and I've been on that since election night back in November. But if you're a Democrat looking at how you won this race and barely beating Herschel Walker and having to draw some of these Republican candidates you did in this midterm, there has to be some introspection here because Biden is not the answer.
We're getting a lot more votes in. I
don't know where Walker's even been.
Let me tell you what I'm hearing from Republicans in Georgia about the end of this campaign. It's going to be close. I think there's a lot of pessimism in the Walker Republican camp that Warnock's got. We haven't called it. I know we're still counting the votes. But credit where credit's due. They're saying, to me, the reason this race is close is because Brian Kemp and Brian Kemp's organization, which went to work for the Senate Leadership Fund in this race, that's one of the key reasons why Walker, who's been a little invisible on this thing and has obviously had an uneven ride here the last 4 weeks, has been able to keep it close. So why are people turning out? Why is Walker able to pull in some votes? I think the people who are really in the know at the strategy level on these campaigns would say one man, Brian Kemp.
I think that's absolutely
giving us this opportunity to make even more history.
I mean, I think Georgia, after this midterm, after what happened in 2020, may be remembered as the state that finally broke Donald Trump. And losing Georgia in the presidential election, losing the Senate race, this is not a state Republicans ought to be losing. And so when we go through this Republican primary, we need to think about the state of Georgia. It's going to be a swing state in 2024. And if we go down this road again, I suspect we're going to get the same result. I think Brian Kemp does stand out for me, despite the Democrats, and congratulations to Senator Warnock. I do think Kemp had a good cycle here and did what he needed to do to show the Republicans that he wants to be a team player. And also the Georgia elections officials and the people who wrote the Georgia voting laws. This was called Jim Crow 2.0 by Joe Biden and others. And everybody voted. Good turnout, good election, nothing bad happened. Governor Duncan, all the Republicans down there who took all the grief for that, I think it should be said, this worked swimmingly in Georgia, even though Republicans didn't get a good outcome. The election system.
Well, Jeff Duncan, let me ask you. I mean, you think
I'm a little negative ad
They did run their fair share of negative ads.
Yeah.
I mean, 50, 60, 70 million dollars in character smashing ads. So it wasn't a clean campaign. And
It
fine.
could have been a lot worse.
They did what they had to do. But I think on Van's point, one thing I learned about this entire election, people with personal brands, apart from somebody else, did well in both parties. Warnock had a brand apart from politics, but the Kemps and the DeWines and the DeSantises and the Abbotts and the Republican Party, they didn't depend on Donald Trump or some other person to define who they are. And I do think this ticket splitting, Gloria, there's something about being able to define and own who you are that people are responding to.
Right.
They don't want you to be a wholly owned subsidiary of some other person or thing. They just want you to be who you are. And Warnock, I think, got that right in this race. Walker got tagged with Trump, and the candidates in these Senate races that got tagged that way with Trump all across the board lost. And that's a big lesson for the next cycle.
Every Republican.
But I haven't seen it yet.
I mean, he talked about terminating the Constitution a couple of days ago, and there's still a lot of.
I've lived through all these undulations, and you're right. He has come back. I'm telling you, in the last month, something has changed.
Yep.
It
I
does
agree.
feel different.
Something has changed,
I think
and
right.
you've had a number of people in Washington, but you've got people out in the middle of the country saying, you know what? I'm glad he was there. I liked what he did. I voted for the man. I knocked on doors, but I don't want to lose anymore, and I'm tired of carrying this guy's bags. And this has been one of the worst months of his political life. I'm telling you, something has changed, and that's what primaries are for. You're right. That's what primaries are for.
I want to just quickly go.
And wanted them to do something.
I think there's plenty of worry for both parties. I think both parties need new leadership in 2024. I think the American people are tired of these parties backing in to these races. They're looking to affirmatively be led. They don't get it out of Trump. I don't really think they're getting it out of Biden. New leadership is needed, and the American people want it.
Senator who's going to represent the whole state of Georgia, he's going to need to reach across the aisle, and I hope that he means that.
You know, one thing about tonight and this entire midterm, pretty well-run election across the board. Very few problems. It did take a long time to count some votes out west, and we really only had one state where somebody's, kind of throwing a fit about a clear outcome. There were a lot of predictions that we were going to have another 2020-style meltdown. That did not happen. And so for all the county clerks and precinct workers and everybody else who runs elections in America, which I'm a strong supporter of the diffused election system we have. All these people that some of them are volunteers or get very low pay and they take these jobs, they are in the crosshairs of a lot of controversy, but we had a pretty well-run election. And tonight, we had a gracious winner. We had a gracious loser. If you think that American democracy was damaged somehow after 2020 and you were wondering what was going to happen here, I would think no matter what party you're in, this whole election should have given you some heart that when push comes to shoves, America will get it right. The American people will get it right, and we did in this midterm.
Even some of the most extreme candidates on the right who were running who lost. I mean, Arizona perhaps is the outlier on this, but Mastriano and others conceded.
Absolutely, and they taught the Republican Party a lesson. They taught Donald Trump a lesson, and you just got to hope the momentum of respecting the outcomes of democratic elections will continue.
Stay with us for more reaction to Senator Warnock.
New York.
Our thanks to Kara for that report. Joining me to talk more about this from New York, CNN senior political commentator Scott Jennings. He once served as a special assistant to former President George W. Bush and is a close confidant of the Senate Minority Leader. And CNN political commentator Bakari Sellers is with us. He is an attorney and former South Carolina State House Democrat. Thank you both for being here tonight. Scott, let me start with you on this Trump case. I mean, what, if any, impact do you think this ruling has on what Donald Trump's potential future in Republican politics is?
Yeah, it's hard to assess what any one thing is going to do, and I just think it's a multitude of things that have happened over the last month that have really eroded or degraded his ability to wage this campaign. His announcement was flat. You've got a number of investigation issues. You've got a number of political issues. I mean, this Georgia situation tonight is a massive blow to him. Georgia may be remembered as the state I tweeted this a little earlier tonight, that breaks Donald Trump. He lost it in 2020. His candidates that he preferred in the primary lost. People have stood up to him in Georgia, in the Republican Party, and in the Democratic Party, and in the suburbs, and everywhere else, and said no to Donald Trump. And he's got this investigation going on over his actions after the 2020 election. This may be the state that does it. So I think it's hard to assess any one thing, Casey, but if you're looking at what's happened to him since he launched his campaign, it ain't good. That's a political science term, but it ain't good.
Very technical, Scott.
Over the past month, has done nothing but help Donald Trump.
All right, Scott, your name was invoked. Your response?
Yeah, look, I think Bakari's right about the rules. A massive fragmented field does benefit a candidate like Trump. I think the question is, how long will all these people stay in? I think Bakari's right. Some of these folks don't really have much of a chance. But the question will be, do they stay in the race long enough to fragment the field? Last time around in 2016, you had people staying in way too long, and so it would benefit this thing to winnow down sooner so that you had sort of one strong alternative. I think if you got it down to that today, look at some of the national polling that's come out, Casey. I mean, it's obvious that Republicans are looking to move on here.
I don't disagree with you at all on that, and I think we've seen some evidence in the midterm elections that would show that if they were able to pick someone other than Donald Trump, it's entirely possible they could win a national election. Look at Brian Kemp and other Republicans. But look, Scott Walker, back in 2016, he tried to warn everyone in September, actually, of 2015, that they all needed to clear out, and nobody's ego would allow it. And I'm not going to lie, I've covered politics long enough to know that, like, the ego that it takes to think you should be president of the United States means, like, these people don't drop out.
Yeah, it could be. I hope not. I do think that DeSantis
Are you going to convince
today,
him yourself? Is Mitch McConnell going to convince him?
Well, I will say that today DeSantis, it strikes me, is a little bit different kind of a candidate than existed in 16. I don't think Trump's ever actually faced another Republican who has the reservoir of support, the deep affection of support that DeSantis does, not just because of what he did as governor, but this crushing victory he scored in Florida, juxtaposed against what looks like a lot of defeats against Trump. So I do think he's a bit of a stronger player. That's not going to stop others, but it looks to me like he's on a rocket ship right now, and he's still got room to grow. So, you know, we'll see how it develops. That's what primaries are for. We'll see if people learn the lessons of the past. But Trump's there to be beaten, and that's the only way he's going to go away is for Republicans to beat him in a primary. He ain't going to be hauled off to jail in time. You know, whatever. He's not going to go. He has to be beaten. He has to be beaten. And a Republican has to do it. That's my view.